Your knowledge of contract language is imperative.
You must know what a violation looks like if you wish to be active in its cessation.
It is important to understand that being active and knowledgeable affects your overall bargaining strength.
Together, towards a more militant NALC.
Good morning. Welcome back, letter carriers. Welcome back to Parcels of Knowledge, the podcast dedicated to delivering knowledge to a city letter carrier, with your host, the Roseville Wrecking Ball, broadcasting from the good city of Roseville, Michigan. Currently on grievance number 403 for the year. I'm going to do something new since I'm relatively proud of my grievance work, and the people here locally, they don't appreciate that discussion so much. I'm just going to begin every episode's intro with what number we're at for the year. It'll also give me a good record as to how things have gone throughout the year. Feel free to keep me updated with what grievances are going on in your stations. I'm not the very best. Don't fall for the praise I get sometimes, but I am proud of what I do. But even someone who people learn from can still learn from each and every person. There is a lesson in each of you guys that I can learn from, and I'm really ready and willing to learn it. From the carriers who are here on their first day to the people who have already retired. You all know something valuable about this place, and I am thirsty for that knowledge. Hope you are too. No grievance tracking system this time around. Sorry guys, I'm not ready yet, but it's important to admit that. I was going to keep it short today, considering that I have a lot going on between STEPI appeals, personal things, and other commitments. I'm even being singled out by my supervisors. In the past couple months, they have racked me up on bogus charges just to make me do the work to get them thrown out. They're being completely intransigent, and I think this most recent one's going to actually help me. I'm going to interview the whole office, and when I'm done, I'll provide overwhelming evidence that they lied about events, and subsequently, I might consider a labor charge. I don't play. The pack of wolves is swimming with the shark now, and they will get what they bargained for. But, on another note, I asked you all what you would like me to speak on today, and I got a lot of great answers. People recognize me for my knowledge of Article 8. Just the other day on From A to Arbitration, they shouted me out as an Article 8 scholar, which, like I said before, I'm not the best. There's other people more deserving of that. But thank you, by the way. I really do appreciate those shout-outs. You guys are too kind. But there's a reason for that. I only speak about the things I know about. Only issue about these topics that were suggested is that I don't necessarily feel comfortable with a lot of these aforementioned topics without at least a week's worth of research, because I don't like to speak on issues that I don't know very well. And I want to make sure I get things right. But I will absolutely cover most of those issues. I really do appreciate that feedback, because now I know what people are looking for. And some of it will have to wait until I know for certain that I will not make a mistake on the facts of the issues at hand. But today there'll be two topics and a decent amount of reading. So it may be actually a little bit longer of an episode than I anticipated, but trust me, it's for a good reason. First topic I would like to talk about is the PS Form 1767, one of management's biggest enemies. They are inherently lazy, and the PS Form 1767 is all about that business. So it's something that they scoff at when you turn it in. Of course, for you newer carriers who may not know what it is, I'm talking about the Report of Hazard or Unsafe Conditions. It's a form you fill out, in duplicate, that describes a safety hazard to management that must be worked on to be abated. It's designed to encourage employee participation in the Postal Service Safety and Health Program and to provide prompt action when employees report a hazard. This form provides a channel of communication between employees and management that promotes a prompt analysis and response with corrective action to reports of alleged hazards, unsafe conditions, or unsafe practices. Supervisors must maintain a supply of PS Form 1767 in the workplace in a manner that provides employees with both easy and, if desired, anonymous access. This means that it must be readily available from the workroom floor, not behind a desk somewhere with limited access. As it is a PS form, you must pay attention to the instructions and follow them markedly so that they don't try to tell you there's anything procedurally deficient about your filing. It's a bullshit argument, of course, but we all know the kind of stunts they like to pull around here. It's always better to be safe than sorry. You have the right to read the instructions on the clock anyway. Put that shit on your 96. Had to read the 1767 instructions and then filled it out appropriately. Anyway, this can all be found in ELM 824, by the way, which is grievable, since it's incorporated into our national agreement via Article 19. I'm going to read from the ELM about the responsibilities of both the employee and the supervisor in terms of the form's use. Employee. Any employee or representative of any employee who believes that an unsafe or unhealthful condition exists in the workplace may do any or all of the following. A. File a report of the condition on PS Form 1767 with the immediate supervisor and request an inspection of the alleged condition. B. If the employee desires to be anonymous, file the PS Form 1767 directly with the installation safety personnel, who will immediately give the report to the employee supervisor for necessary action. In such cases, safety personnel must not disclose the name of the individual making the report. C. Report alleged unsafe conditions to a steward, if one is available, who may then discuss the condition with the employee supervisor. Discrimination against an employee for reporting a safety and health hazard is unlawful. Supervisor. The immediate supervisor must, promptly, within the tour of duty, A. Investigate the alleged condition. B. Initiate immediate corrective action or make appropriate recommendations. C. Record actions or recommendations on PS Form 1767. D. Forward the original PS Form 1767 and one copy to the next appropriate level of management. E. Give the employee a copy signed by the supervisor as receipt. F. Immediately forward the third copy to the safety office. It is the supervisor's responsibility to monitor the status of the report at all times until the hazard is abated. If the hazard remains unabated longer than 7 calendar days, the supervisor must verbally inform the employee as to the abatement status at the end of each 7-day interval. Installation heads and managers are responsible for responding promptly to hazard reports and ensuring that line supervisors are diligent in correcting hazards. If a hazard report indicates that imminent or serious danger exists, the installation head must take immediate corrective action. Best part about it is that the supervisor must promptly, within the tour of duty, address the concern, and that is where we get them every time. Like I said, management's usually inherently lazy. They are usually the type of people who just couldn't cut it as a carrier, so they would rather turn their whole career into a stationary event behind a desk while they yell at carriers for having stationary events. Anyway, if you have questions about PS Form 1767, feel free to message the Parcels of Knowledge Facebook. Now that I've sufficiently covered that issue, I'd like to talk about white papers and read 2 specific ones to show you how important and useful they are. White papers are documents that were created by the Contract Administration Unit of the National NALC. They have been a gold standard for stewards and have been an invaluable tool for grievance processing. Even carriers who do not file grievances can find immense knowledge from these documents. They really need to bring these things back and make a lot more of them on every subject. Today, I will just simply read from 2 of them and let you be the judge of how useful these things are. It's reading, sure, but it's good stuff, not the boring national agreement stuff. It usually starts with the history of the issue and then goes into how to fight it. Today's white papers are about overburdened routes and staffing. I'm going to read them without comment for the most part, since it's probably going to be a long episode. Alright, so here we got overburdened routes. The time gap between the 2 papers is crazy, but this one was written August 1st, 1988, so hopefully everything's still applicable, but I do believe everything is. Overburdened routes. Many of the problems most commonly experienced by letter carriers have their origin in overburdened routes. Fortunately, contract provisions are in place to enforce the right to an 8-hour assignment. Despite these contractual protections, overburdened routes continue to be a problem in some locations. This paper has been prepared by the NALC Contract Administration Unit in order to assist branch officers and stewards in handling these problems. The paper summarizes the results of an extensive review of the bargaining history of the relevant handbooks and provisions, as well as all applicable arbitration awards. The M39 handbook, which is incorporated into the National Agreement by Article 19, requires that a special route inspection be given whenever a carrier requests one, and it is warranted. M39 Section 271 states, 271G, if over any 6 consecutive week periods when work performance is otherwise satisfactory, a route shows over 30 minutes of overtime or auxiliary assistance on each of 3 days or more in each week during this period, the regular carrier assigned to such route shall, upon request, receive a special mail count and inspection within 4 weeks of the request. The month of December must be excluded from consideration when determining a 6 consecutive week period. However, if a period of overtime and/or auxiliary assistance begins in November and continues into January, then January is considered to be a consecutive period even though December is omitted. A new consecutive week period is not begun. 271H. Mail shall not be curtailed for the sole purpose of avoiding need for special mail count and inspections. The guarantees provided by Section 271 of the M39 were further strengthened by a Memorandum of Understanding on Special Counts and Inspections incorporated into the 1987 National Agreement. The memorandum states, the United States Postal Service and National Association of Letter Carriers agree that it is in the best interest of the Postal Service for letter carrier routes to be in proper adjustment. Therefore, where the regular carrier has requested a special mail count and inspection, and the criteria set forth in Part 271G of the Methods Handbook M39 have been met, such inspection must be completed within 4 weeks of the request and shall not be delayed. If the results of the inspection indicate that the route is to be adjusted, such adjustment must be placed in effect within 52 calendar days of the completion of the mail count in accordance with Section 211.3 of the M39. Exceptions may be granted by a Division General Manager only when warranted by valid operational circumstances. Arbitrators have unanimously held that special inspections are mandatory when the union can prove that the criteria in M39 Section 271 have been met. This is true even in cases where the regular carrier has been absent for part of the 6-week period. The provisions of Section 271 refer to the route and not the carrier on the route, despite the fact that the purpose of any such inspection is to adjust the route to the individual carrier. Moreover, once a carrier requests a special route inspection and demonstrates that it is warranted, the Postal Service cannot evade the requirement to conduct the inspection by unilaterally providing relief or making an adjustment. The special route inspections provided for in M39 Section 271 must be conducted in exactly the same manner as regular counts and inspections. They differ from a regular count and inspection only in that they may be conducted in June, July, and August. It is, however, not always in the best interest of the letter carrier to request them during the low-volume summer months. Special route inspections are not unit and route reviews. The right to a special route inspection is unaffected by the fact that the office involved may be undergoing or be scheduled for a unit and route review. Special route examinations are not a meaningless exercise. The M39 handbook requires not only that special inspections be conducted when warranted, but also that special inspections result in permanent adjustments to 8 hours. M39 Section 242.122 states, the proper adjustment of carrier routes means an equitable and feasible division of work among all carrier routes assigned to the office. All regular routes should consist of as nearly 8 hours daily work as possible. Arbitrators have held that it is not sufficient for the Postal Service merely to follow the procedures specified in the M39 when examining and adjusting routes. Rather, the final result must be an 8-hour route. In C7630, Regional Arbitrator wrote as follows, The inspections are not before the arbitrator as part of the present issue. What is before this arbitrator is the matter of adjustments. In examining the record, it is clear that the subject routes are not 8-hour routes. This does not mean that the procedures for adjustment were somehow violated. The methods by which adjustments are made and the results of those adjustments on letter carrier workloads may be viewed as separable issues under the language of the M39. Arbitrators have granted monetary remedies in cases where the Postal Service violated the contract by refusing to conduct special route inspections when they were required to do so by the terms of the M39 Section 271. They reasoned that since the grievance were required to work overtime, they should not have worked. No possible future remedy could return that time to them. Since merely instructing the Postal Service not to violate the agreement in the future would not, in their view, be sufficient to make the grievance whole, monetary remedies were ordered. Arbitrator Pribble in C-5545 wrote as follows: Without clear evidence in this record that the parties anticipated some way to make whole the three grievants who have been harmed by clear and repeated breaches of the agreement, some monetary award is needed for the grievance. Unlike the Gamzer Award, no restructuring of future opportunities or equalization formula applies here. In this case, the three grievants have been required to work overtime that they should have not worked. No possible future remedy can return this time to them. Moreover, it would be insufficient remedy here merely to instruct the MSC not to breach the agreement in the future. This remedy will make the grievance as whole as possible at this time. The employer is ordered to pay 1 extra hour's pay at the regular rates of pay for each and every day that each grievant has worked overtime until the results of their special route inspections are implemented. There is more agreement among arbitrators that some monetary remedy is due in such cases than there is upon the exact form of any such monetary remedies should take. In contrast to Arbitrator Pribble's award cited above, Arbitrator Grossman in C-6720 ordered the Postal Service to pay 1 hour's pay at his regular rate of pay for each and every hour that he was required to work in excess of 8½ hours. Other arbitrators have ordered or memorialized consent awards agreeing to monetary payments in fixed dollars amounts as remedies. After review of all applicable arbitration awards, the Contract Administration Unit has concluded that the most appropriate remedy in such cases is similar to those granted in C-7630 and C-7536. The following wording is suggested: all carriers not on the overtime desired list be paid an additional 50% premium for all overtime hours worked from the time the special route exam should have been conducted until such time as the results of the exam are implemented. All too often, the union has been able to convince an arbitrator that the terms of the contract has been breached, only to have the arbitrator find that the particular remedy requested is beyond his or her authority to grant, or otherwise inappropriate to remedy the specific violation. It is therefore advisable that all remedy requests include the additional catch-all phrase, or that the grievant be otherwise made whole. Awards supporting the authority of arbitrators grant monetary remedies in such cases include, it's got a ton of cases cited. You can see this for yourself. It's M document 872. The skill and success of NALC arbitration advocates has greatly strengthened the position of union officers and stewards handling special route inspection grievances. It is not always necessary to proceed to arbitration with these grievances. Rather, the Postal Service representative often sustains such grievances in full during the earlier steps of the grievance procedure. Failure to make standards or the inability to finish a route in the allotted time is not in itself just cause for discipline. However, the letter carriers who have requested a special route inspection are afforded even additional protection. Regional Arbitrator Levick held in C-5952 that once a route qualifies for a special inspection and the regular carrier requests one, any discipline for expansion of street time is inappropriate unless and until such time as an inspection is conducted. The contract and the incorporated handbook provisions provide an enforceable mechanism to assure adjustment of routes to 8 hours. Where conditions warrant, we should not hesitate to use it. Amen, brother. Alright, so I'm going to move on. Oh man, this is going to be 30 minutes. Okay, the next one is about staffing. The Contract Administration Unit has prepared this publication to help branch leaders monitor the Postal Service responsibility to properly staff its facilities in order to meet its contractual obligations under Article 8 in the Employee Labor Relations Manual. The parties negotiated these contractual obligations over the years in order to protect employees from working mandatory overtime. In facilities that lack proper staffing, that employee protection is often sacrificed by supervisors as they manage the daily workload. When staffing is insufficient, supervisors often resort to assigning overtime to full-time non-ODL employees and full-time ODL employees at the same time during a given workday. This is known as simultaneous scheduling of overtime. As justification, USPS usually claims that an operational window, management's self-proclaimed deadline for completion of all deliveries, requires the simultaneous scheduling. Although proper staffing would prevent this from occurring, the Postal Service may claim that Article 3 gives its complete discretion when it comes to decisions on hiring. However, that is not the case at all. The JCAM states under Article 3, while postal management has the right to manage the Postal Service, it must act in accordance with applicable laws, regulations, contract provisions, arbitration award letters, and memoranda. Consequently, many of management rights enumerated in Article 3 are limited by negotiated contract provisions. Thus, management's Article 3 decisions on hiring and staff are clearly limited by the negotiated Article 8 provisions that protect employees from simultaneous scheduling of overtime. This conclusion is supported by a review of the pertinent contractual provisions and their negotiation history. Background. Article 3. This article has remained virtually unchanged since the first negotiated national agreement in 1971. Background. Article 8. Article 8 has gone through an enormous transformation since collective bargaining began in 1971. Before looking at those changes, it is necessary to examine the wording of overtime provisions as they existed prior to collective bargaining. In 1968, prior to collective bargaining, the overtime provisions were located in Article 15. They stated in relevant part, in emergencies, or as the need of the service requires, employees may be required to perform overtime work or to work on holidays. In administrating overtime within a craft, a cardinal principle will be that overtime should be granted on a basis of need. When it is needed, where it is needed, how it is needed, and the skills required. When scheduling overtime, all qualified employees within the appropriate craft shall be given opportunities for overtime on an equitable basis. In 1971, the overtime provisions were moved to Article 8 and were changed to read, overtime assignments. Overtime work shall be required on the basis of need, when it is needed, where it is needed, how it is needed, and the skills required, and shall be scheduled on an equitable basis among qualified employees doing similar work in the work location where the employees regularly work. In 1973, they negotiated changes to Article 8. The parties negotiated many changes to Article 8 in 1973. One of those changes was the establishment of the ODL. Another was the establishment of maximum number of hours that a full-time employee could be required to work. The creation of the ODL gives rise to the simultaneous scheduling definition provided earlier in this publication. The agreement went on to define the circumstance in which a non-ODL carrier could still be required to work overtime if the ODL does not provide sufficient qualified people. In addition, the agreement set a limit on the number of hours a full-time employee could work in a service day and the maximum number of days a full-time employee could work in a service week. These changes were significant because they narrowed the circumstances in which the Postal Service can simultaneously schedule employees to work overtime. They also placed the responsibility upon the Postal Service to properly staff its facilities so that no full-time employee will be required to work more than 10 hours per day or 6 days per week. Based on the language of the 1973 agreement, there were certain circumstances under which the Postal Service could simultaneously schedule ODL and non-ODL full-time employees to work overtime. As an example, the Postal Service could assign an ODL employee to work overtime while also assigning overtime to a non-ODL employee on his or her own route on a regular scheduled day. Article 8.5.c.2. On the other hand, if the Postal Service chooses to assign a non-ODL employee 1 hour of overtime on a route other than his or her own, 1 hour of overtime to an ODL employee, the simultaneous scheduling would, under normal circumstances, violate Article 8. Even with the newly negotiated language, which narrowed the circumstances in which the Postal Service could simultaneously schedule, USPS still retained the right under Article 3.f to take whatever actions may be necessary to carry out its mission in emergency situations. An unforeseen circumstance or combination of circumstances which calls for the immediate action in a situation which is not expected to be of a recurring nature. Background: ELM. In the first issue of the ELM, the Postal Service reaffirmed the previously negotiated provisions of Article 8.5f by limiting full-time bargaining unit employees to working no more than 10 hours per day or 6 days a week. It also limited all other employees to working no more than 12 hours per day. It is important to note that the maximum allowable hours provision was entered into freely by the Postal Service. By agreeing to this provision in 1973, the Postal Service bound itself to comply with its agreement from that point forward. The Postal Service still retained its one exception, which was for emergencies under Article 3.f. This contractual obligation has never been changed. Therefore, if the Postal Service is found to be requiring its employees to work beyond the maximum allowable hours in violation of Article 3 and 8, staffing issues should be addressed. 1984 changes to Article 8. The next change to Article 8 occurred during negotiations for 1984 National Agreement. The new language found in Article 8.5f and g further narrowed the circumstances in which simultaneous scheduling will be permissible. The new language of 8.5f required the Postal Service to sufficiently staff its facilities to ensure that no full-time regular employee are required to work overtime on more than 4 or 5 of the employee's scheduled days, or over 8 hours on a non-scheduled day, or over 6 days in a service week. The new language in Article 8.5g also increased the number of hours a full-time ODL employee could work in a service day without changing the maximum allowable hours for the service week. This is significant because employees on the ODL were now available to work up to 12 hours a day before management can require, with restrictions, a non-ODL carrier to work overtime. The direction that the parties were heading in clearly to reduce the amount of overtime that employees would be required to work, and specifically to protect non-ODL employees from working mandatory overtime. This was later affirmed in a Memorandum of Understanding which was negotiated by the Postal Service and the APWU. It states that excessive use of overtime was inconsistent with the best interests of postal employees in the Postal Service. The memorandum also recognized the possibility that overtime would be necessary from time to time. Based on this, the parties agreed to additional restrictions regarding the assignment of overtime, while continuing the use of overtime desired lists. The memorandum also gave an example in which the voluntary overtime desired list did not provide sufficient qualified people, and qualified full-time regular non-ODLs were required to work overtime simultaneously with ODL employees. This language negotiated by the APWU without the NALC was most certainly the result of time pressures within the clerk craft for getting the mail out. The parties further agreed that the memorandum did not give rise to any contractual commitment beyond the provisions of Article 8. The terms of the memorandum were later accepted by the NALC, but only after the Postal Service had agreed to include language which addressed the provisions of Article 8.5.c.d. Recourse to the overtime desired list is not necessarily in the case of a letter carrier working on the employee's own route on one of the employee's regular scheduled days. This paragraph also became known as the letter carrier paragraph. National arbitration on simultaneous scheduling. The new overtime language of Article 8 in the 1984 agreement became the focus of an interpretive dispute between the APWU and the Postal Service. NALC intervened in the case. APWU contended that ODL employees had the option of accepting or refusing overtime work when it exceeded the Article 8.5.f limits. If the contention had been correct, it would have meant that the non-ODL employees could have been required to work overtime once ODL employees had been worked 8 hours on a non-scheduled day, 6 days in a service week, or overtime of 4 out of 5 of their scheduled days in a service week, assuming that the ODL employees exercise their option not to work that overtime. Neither the Postal Service nor the NALC agreed with APW's contention. The case is therefore important because the award from the National Arbitrator Mithenthal outlined the Postal Service's position on 8.5F and 8.5G limitations on simultaneous scheduling. Arbitrator Mithenthal put the issue in perspective in his award when he wrote about the background of the case. This dispute is significant not just for those who have placed their names on the ODL. It also has derivative impact on full-time regulars not on the ODL, for they can be required to work overtime only if all available and qualified employees on the ODL have reached the 12-hour day and 60-hour week limits. The APW view of ODL employees' rights would make non-ODL employees more susceptible to an overtime draft, while the Postal Service and NALC view would make non-ODL employees less susceptible to an overtime draft. In addition, in national arbitration, management together with the NALC fought for the negotiated 5F and 5G employee protections against mandated overtime. The parties' intent in Article 8 negotiations is therefore very clear, to place limits on simultaneous scheduling. Even more important than the parties' intent is the fact that National Arbitrator Mithenthal agreed with the NALC and the Postal Service that those limits did, in fact, exist. Arbitrator Mittenthal's award specifically stated, "My conclusion is that ODL employees do not have the option to accept or refuse overtime beyond 0.5F limitations. They can be required to perform such overtime. The non-ODL employees may not be required to work overtime until the ODL employees have exhausted their overtime obligations under 5G. Although this case originated in the APW's claim that ODL employees had the option to refuse overtime that exceeded the 5F limits, Mittenthal's ruling is just as applicable to other situations too. Based on the above-cited language, management may assign non-ODL employees to work overtime off their assignment or on a non-scheduled day only after it meets the 12 and 60-hour obligations under 8.5G. The only exception will be in the event of actual emergencies as outlined in Article 3.F. The application of the letter carrier paragraph caused some confusion and generated disagreement. In an attempt to clarify the overtime provisions, the parties subsequently entered into a memorandum of understanding, which stated, if a carrier is not on the ODL or has not signed up for the work assignment overtime, management must not assign overtime to that carrier without first fulfilling the obligation outlined in the letter carrier paragraph. After the reaffirmation of the letter carrier paragraph and inclusion of the new language on providing auxiliary assistance, simultaneous scheduling and staffing responsibilities changed slightly. As an example, simultaneous scheduling would be permissible in the case of a non-ODL carrier working up to 10 hours on his or her assignment on a regular scheduled day, as long as no ODL carrier was available to work at the overtime rate. Simultaneous scheduling would also be permissible in cases where non-ODL carriers were working overtime on an assignment other than their own, or working a non-scheduled day, as long as all ODL carriers were working up to 12 hours in a service day. While Article 3.F still allowed for simultaneous scheduling in emergencies, the staffing responsibilities remained the same. That is, management was obligated to ensure that ODL employees were not required to work more than the maximum of 12 and 60, and non-ODL employees did not work more than the Article 8.5F limits or in violation of 8.5G. 1991, Arbitrator Mittenthal settled the dispute over the 1984 memorandum. APWU then brought a national dispute challenging the circumstances under which the Postal Service could simultaneously schedule employees. Specifically, APW asserted that the Postal Service could simultaneously schedule employees only under conditions set forth in the 1984 memorandum. The Postal Service disagreed and stated that the memorandum was intended only to confirm that management was free to continue existing practices with respect to simultaneous scheduling as of December of 1984. Arbitrator Mittenthal upheld the Postal Service's position. This ruling allowed simultaneous scheduling in facilities as it existed prior to 84. For the letter carrier craft, in cases that would otherwise have been a contractual violation, this would only refer to emergency situations as per 3.F. The relationship between staffing and operational window. As mentioned earlier, the term operational window has been loosely applied to mean a time of day which management has decided is the deadline for completion of all deliveries. Management has offered various reasons for such deadline, including a last or critical dispatch, customer satisfaction, service goals, darkness, and numerous other circumstances and scenarios. NALC has never accepted an operational window, nor any form of simultaneous scheduling, which requires non-ODL employees to work overtime unless all available employees on the ODL are worked in accordance with Article 8.5.g. Simply put, the Postal Service can implement operational windows, service goals, or any other program so long as its implementation does not violate the provisions of the National Agreement. Therefore, management has an obligation to properly staff its facilities to remain in compliance with the National Agreement. For example, if the Postal Service, pursuant to Article 3, decided that all mail in a delivery unit should be delivered by 5 p.m., it is required to properly staff that unit to comply with the provisions of Article 8. Regulations specifically related to staffing are found in the EL 312, Employee and Placement Handbook. The District Manager of Human Resources is responsible for planning and conducting appropriate ongoing recruitment efforts to meet its local needs. Planning, opening, announcing, and publicizing examinations for recruitment to meet staffing needs. The installation head is responsible for forecasting and recruitment requirements in the installation in sufficient time to assure that there are qualified persons available for that appointment. While the installation head is responsible for forecasting recruitment needs, local management from all organizational functions must work together in assessing how changing operational needs will affect recruitment needs. Therefore, if the Postal Services decide to make an operational change that requires all mail delivery to be delivered in a unit by 5 p.m., the regulations clearly state that management must staff accordingly. The EL 312 Section 211.1 bears repeating. While the installation head is responsible for forecasting recruitment needs, local management must work together in assessing how changing operational needs will affect recruitment needs. This does not mean that circumstances may not arise from time to time that require implementation of simultaneous scheduling that would otherwise violate Article 8. The NALC recognizes such circumstances may exist consistent with the Mittenthal Award in Article 3.f. As an example, a delivery unit properly staffed under normal circumstances may find that due to non-reoccurring, unforeseen circumstances on a given day, there are insufficient employees on the ODL available to deliver the mail in the time needed. However, it is under circumstances such as this that the branch leaders should question the validity of the operational window and look at the circumstances in which the simultaneous scheduling occurred. Is the window unreasonable exercise of management's rights or stratagem to avoid recourse to the ODL? Is the window based on the last dispatch that is regularly adhered to, or on a goal that management may or may not meet on a consistent basis? Has staffing usually been adequate to meet the window, or has it fallen below what is required to avoid simultaneous scheduling? Is the simultaneous scheduling a first-time occurrence or a frequent one? When was the window implemented? Was it implemented with the proper staffing and scheduling to ensure compliance with the national agreement? The end result is that if a properly staffed postal service is victim to some unforeseen circumstance that may require the use of simultaneous scheduling, the question of whether or not a violation of Article 8 has occurred must be determined on a case-by-case basis based on the validity of the window. With increasing frequency across the United States, management's requiring letter carriers to work long hours, often exceeding the national agreement's limits. While local unions have successfully filed numerous grievances protesting these violations and have often recovered monetary remedies, management has continued to commit these violations. It is therefore essential that the union make necessary arguments about staffing. Otherwise, the problem of working beyond maximum allowable hours will persist. It is important to remember that in the 1984 memorandum, the parties agreed and recognized that recognizing the excessive use of overtime is inconsistent with the best interest of the Postal Service employees, and it is the intent of the parties in adopting changes to Article 8 to limit overtime to avoid excessive mandatory overtime and to protect the interest of employees who do not wish to work overtime. If postal management is violating these maximum allowable hour provisions of the national agreement, branch leaders should address the violations, along with other appropriate remedies. NALC should request that the Postal Service staff its facilities sufficiently to ensure compliance with the national agreement. Conclusion. The history of negotiations concerning overtime language makes clear that the NALC and USPS explicitly agreed about the importance of protecting employees from an unwanted mandatory overtime work, as well as placing limits on overtime in general. With each successive change in the negotiated contract language, the parties narrowed further the circumstances in which management could simultaneously schedule a non-ODL employee to work overtime. In the beginning, management had minimal limits on working carriers' overtime. Throughout the years of negotiations, though, the Postal Service freely entered into agreements that progressively limited the circumstances in which management was free to simultaneously schedule non-ODL employees to work overtime. Ultimately, those circumstances were narrowed to include only actual emergencies or situations which management has met its obligations to fully maximize the ODL carriers. While Article 8 language changed many times over the years, the language that remained consistent was Article 3. Article 3 outlines management's obligation to maintain the efficiency of operations and the integrity of Article 8 by properly staffing. In cases of simultaneous scheduling and maximum allowable hour violations, it is important to fashion a remedy which addresses the cause of the violation. That cause is usually management's failure to staff a facility sufficiently to ensure compliance with the provisions of Article 8. A review of prior cases shows that when these arguments are properly presented in arbitration, the union's position is upheld. And that, my friends, is probably the longest episode I've ever had, but I want you to judge those white papers. Tell me how you think those would be appropriate in today's age. One was from 2006, that most recent one. The other one was from 1988, but we need more of these things, in my opinion. You let me know what you think. Don't forget, last chance to submit questions to NALC presidential candidates James Henry and Mike Cariff is September 1st. If you have something to ask either candidate, please submit questions to the Parcels of Knowledge Facebook or to the email rosevillewreckingball@yahoo.com. I'm going to need more questions. Please, anything you need to ask, feel free to shoot it to me in a message because I want these to be real good, knowledgeable episodes. But I hope you learned something valuable today. And as always, have a good day.
Shout out to the Roseville Wrecking Ball. He is an Article 8 scholar, and thank God. We need Article 8 scholars right now. The Grievous Genius and the Roseville Wrecking Ball doing amazing work.
Brothers and sisters, this guy is good, man. He's fucking good.
And my boy Joshua, he killed it. Man, he's lockstep right now. He's killing it.
You would think this guy has been around for 30 fucking years. That's how good he is. Yeah, he's like he owned the contract.
Shout out to Josh.